My name is Margaret Thompson, but everyone has always called me Maggie. I am 55 years old, a recently retired librarian, and for the first time in 32 years, I am living alone. 6 months ago, I would have told you that being alone was my greatest fear. Today, I am beginning to understand that being alone and being lonely are two very different things. It was a Tuesday morning in late July when I discovered that my family had erased me from their lives as cleanly as deleting a file from a computer. I was sitting in my small apartment in the Hawthorne district of Portland, Oregon, drinking coffee from a mug that read, "World's Okayest Mom," a gag gift from my daughter Emma 3 Christmases ago that had somehow become my favorite. The morning sun was streaming through the windows I had finally hung curtains on, casting geometric patterns across the hardwood floors I had learned to appreciate without carpet. I was scrolling through Facebook, something I rarely did but had started doing more often since the divorce. Social media felt like a window into a world I was still learning to navigate as a single woman. Most of my married friends had grown distant after Richard and I split up, as if divorce might be contagious, and I found myself curious about the lives people chose to share online. That was when I saw the post from my niece Ashley, my brother Tom's youngest daughter. She had shared a photo album titled Thompson Family Reunion 2024, Best Weekend Ever, with 47 pictures and a heart emoji. My coffee mug paused halfway to my lips. The Thompson Family Reunion. Our annual gathering at the family cabin on Crater Lake. A tradition that had been happening for 38 years, ever since my parents bought the property when I was 17. A tradition I had never missed. Not when Emma had pneumonia as a toddler. Not when Richard's mother was dying. Not even the year I had food poisoning and spent most of the weekend in the bathroom. But this year, apparently, I had missed it, because I had never been invited. I clicked on the photo album with trembling fingers, my heart beating faster with each image that loaded. There was my brother Tom, flipping burgers on the same grill my father had used for decades. My sister-in-law Carol, organizing what looked like a 3-legged race with the grandchildren. My younger brother Jake and his wife Sandra, sitting in the Adirondack chairs that faced the lake, holding beer bottles and laughing at something off camera. There was Emma, my 28-year-old daughter, wearing a sundress I had never seen before, her arm around her boyfriend Derek, both of them smiling widely. She looked happy, relaxed, like she belonged exactly where she was. I scrolled through image after image of my family enjoying themselves without me. The annual volleyball tournament, the traditional fish fry on Saturday night, the group photo on the dock that we had taken every year since I was a teenager, with the mountains reflected in the lake behind us. I was in none of these pictures. It was as if I had never existed. My hands were shaking by the time I reached the final photos from Sunday morning, the traditional farewell breakfast before everyone packed up and drove home, and that was when I saw it, the cake. Every year, Carol made a sheet cake to celebrate the reunion, decorated with the Thompson family crest that my grandfather had designed in the 1950s, and the words Thompson Strong in blue frosting. This year's cake looked the same as always, except for one addition that made my blood run cold. On one side of the cake, there was a section that had never been there before. A border of black frosting surrounded a cluster of printed photographs that had been carefully placed on the white icing. Above the photos, in elegant script, were the words, "In memory of." The photos were of family members who had died over the years. Grandpa Thompson, who had passed when I was 30. Great Aunt Ethel, who had died 5 years ago at 97. My cousin Michael, who had been killed in a car accident in 2015. And there, between a photo of Michael and one of Great Aunt Ethel, was a picture of me. Not a recent photo, but one from Emma's high school graduation 6 years ago. I was wearing a navy blue dress and pearls, smiling proudly as I stood behind my daughter in her cap and gown. The photo had been cropped so that Richard was no longer visible beside me, leaving just my face surrounded by black frosting and the word memory hovering above my head like a gravestone inscription. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned, zooming in and out of the image, hoping I was hallucinating, hoping it was some kind of technical glitch or cruel joke. But no, there I was, memorialized on a cake at a family gathering I had not been invited to, officially declared dead by the people who were supposed to love me most. I set my phone down with hands that would not stop trembling and walked to the bathroom, where I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was very much alive, a little thinner than she had been a year ago, a little grayer, but breathing and present and real. So why had my family buried me? The answer, I knew, lay in the choice I had made 8 months ago to file for divorce from Richard Thompson, ending a marriage that had been slowly suffocating me for years. Richard, who was Tom's business partner in their construction company. Richard, who had coached Jake's son in Little League for 6 seasons. Richard, who had been part of the Thompson family longer than some of the actual Thompsons. When I left Richard, I had not just left my husband. I had apparently left my family. The signs had been there, subtle but persistent. Phone calls that went unanswered, text messages that received delayed, polite responses. Emma's visits became less frequent, her conversations more careful, as if she were walking through a minefield. When I asked about family events, I was told they were just small things or nothing special. I had convinced myself that the distance was temporary, that families needed time to adjust to divorce, that eventually things would return to normal. I had been patient, understanding, grateful for whatever scraps of attention came my way, but they had not been planning to include me at all. They had been planning to erase me. I called Emma first, my hands still shaking as I dialed her number. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding breathless and slightly annoyed. "Hi, Mom. I cannot talk long. I am at work." "Emma, I saw the photos from the reunion." Silence. Long, awful silence that stretched between us like a canyon. "Mom, I can explain. Can you? Because I am looking at a picture of myself on a memorial cake, and I am having trouble understanding how that needs explaining. It was not supposed to be like that. Aunt Carol she thought it would be easier if... Easier than what? Easier than inviting me? Mom, please. You have to understand. After the divorce, everything got complicated. Richard is still part of the family. He was there, and Uncle Tom thought it would be awkward if you both came. So you chose him? We did not choose anyone. We thought maybe it was better to give everyone some space. Space. Is that what you call putting my photo with the dead relatives? Emma's voice cracked. I told Aunt Carol not to do that. I said it was wrong, but she said it was symbolic, like you were dead to that part of your life, and maybe it would help everyone move on. Move on. As if I were a phase they had outgrown, a mistake they needed to correct. Emma, I am your mother. I know. Do you? Because mothers do not belong on memorial cakes unless they are actually dead. Mom, I am sorry. I really am. But you have to understand how hard this has been for everyone. The divorce, the drama, the way you just changed everything. Changed everything. I had left an emotionally abusive marriage, moved into a small apartment, and started seeing a therapist to work through 32 years of being told my feelings did not matter. If that counted as changing everything, then I supposed I was guilty as charged. I have to go, Emma said quickly. We can talk about this later. When later? When are you planning to acknowledge that I exist? But she had already hung up. I called Tom next, my older brother who had always been the family mediator, the one who smoothed over conflicts and kept everyone talking. He answered immediately, as if he had been expecting my call. Maggie, I was wondering when I would hear from you. Were you? Because apparently you were not wondering hard enough to invite me to the family reunion. Tom sighed, the same long-suffering sound he had made when we were children, and I had complained about being left out of his games with the neighborhood boys. Maggie, come on. You know it is not that simple. Actually, it is exactly that simple. You either invite your sister to the family reunion, or you do not. There is no middle ground. Richard is family too. Richard is my ex-husband. I am your sister. I have been your sister for 55 years. He has been your business partner for 12. It is not about how long. It is about what works for everyone. What works for everyone except me. You made your choice when you filed for divorce. The words hit me like a physical blow. I made my choice to leave an unhappy marriage. I did not choose to leave my family. Maggie, you have to understand. Richard is devastated. He still loves you. He keeps asking if there is a chance you two might work things out. There is not. He does not believe that. And frankly, neither do some of us. Some of us. As if my marriage were a democracy where everyone got a vote except the 2 people actually in it. Tom, Richard spent 3 decades telling me I was too sensitive, too emotional, too demanding. He made me feel like I was crazy for wanting a partner instead of a supervisor. Why would I go back to that? Because marriage is hard, Maggie. You do not just give up when things get difficult. I did not give up. I survived. Tom was quiet for a moment, and I could hear voices in the background, the sounds of a construction site where he was probably standing in the July heat, wiping sweat from his forehead while explaining to his dramatic sister why she did not deserve basic human dignity. "Look," he said finally, "maybe we handled this wrong. Maybe we should have talked to you first. Maybe. Okay, we should have talked to you first. But Maggie, you have to meet us halfway here. You cannot just blow up your life and expect everyone else to pretend it is normal. I did not blow up my life, I saved it. By destroying your marriage. By ending a marriage that was destroying me. Richard says you never even tried counseling." Of course Richard said that. Richard, who had refused to go to therapy with me for years, claiming that our problems were all in my head and that talking to strangers about private matters was self-indulgent nonsense. Richard, who had agreed to exactly 3 sessions before declaring the therapist biased against men and refusing to continue. "Tom, I am not going to defend my decision to people who were not living my life. Fine. But you cannot expect us to pretend Richard does not exist either. He is part of this family. So am I. Are you? Because lately it feels like you are more interested in being right than being family." The accusation stung because it was so fundamentally wrong. I had never been more interested in being family than I was right now, sitting alone in my apartment, staring at a photo of myself on a memorial cake, desperate for someone to remember that I was still alive. "Tom, I need you to hear me. I am not asking you to choose between Richard and me. I am asking you to remember that I exist. I am asking you not to put my photo with the dead people." The cake thing was Carol's idea. I told her it was probably too much. Probably too much. As if symbolically killing your sister-in-law was a matter of degree, rather than basic human decency. "I have to go," Tom said. "We have a job site meeting in 5 minutes. Wait. Tom, please, can we figure this out? I do not know, Maggie. Can we? Because right now it feels like you want us to choose sides, and that is not fair to anyone. I want you to choose decency." But he had already hung up, leaving me alone with the silence and the morning sun, and the growing realization that the family I had spent 55 years trying to belong to had decided I no longer fit. I spent the rest of that Tuesday in a strange, numb state, moving through my apartment like a ghost haunting her own life. I watered the plants I had bought after moving out of the house I had shared with Richard, small succulents that required minimal care and seemed to thrive on neglect. I organized my books by author, a task that had always calmed me during my 30 years as a librarian. I made myself a sandwich for lunch and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, staring out the window at the street below where people walked their dogs and rode bicycles and lived lives that did not include being declared dead by their own families. That evening, I called my therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, and left a voicemail asking for an emergency session. Sarah had been helping me navigate the divorce and its aftermath for 8 months, guiding me through the complicated process of rediscovering who I was without Richard's voice in my head, telling me who I should be. She called me back within an hour. "Maggie, I got your message. What is going on?" I told her about the photos, about the cake, about the phone calls with Emma and Tom. I told her about the growing realization that my family had been slowly editing me out of their story, and that the reunion was just the final, official deletion. "How are you feeling right now?" Sarah asked. "Angry, hurt, confused, like I am living in some kind of alternate reality where leaving an unhappy marriage makes you dead to your family. What do you think is really happening here?" I considered the question, turning it over in my mind like a stone I was examining for flaws. "I think they are punishing me for choosing myself over keeping everyone else comfortable." "Can you say more about that?" "For 32 years, I made my marriage work by making myself smaller. I did not complain when Richard made major decisions without consulting me. I did not object when he criticized my friends, my clothes, my opinions. I kept the peace by keeping quiet. And now? Now I am not keeping quiet anymore, and they do not know what to do with me. What do you want to do with this information?" That was the question I had been avoiding all day. What did I want? Did I want to fight for a place in a family that had literally declared me dead? Did I want to apologize for the crime of leaving an unhappy marriage? Did I want to beg for forgiveness for the sin of choosing my own happiness? I do not know, I admitted. Part of me wants to show up at Tom's house and demand an explanation. Part of me wants to call Emma and tell her exactly what I think of her loyalty. Part of me wants to send Richard a photo of myself very much alive and ask him how he feels about being married to a ghost. And what does another part of you want? I was quiet for a long moment, listening to the sounds of evening in Portland. Traffic on Hawthorne Boulevard, the distant hum of conversation from the restaurant below my apartment, the clatter of dishes being washed in someone's kitchen. Another part of me wants to build a life so good, so full, so authentically mine, that their opinion of it becomes irrelevant. Tell me more about that. I want to stop waiting for them to realize I am worth including. I want to stop making myself smaller so they can feel bigger. I want to remember what it feels like to be around people who are happy to see me. Do you have people like that in your life? I thought about my coworkers at the library, who had thrown me a retirement party 6 months ago and still invited me to their monthly book club meetings. I thought about my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who always stopped to chat when we got our mail at the same time and had started bringing me tomatoes from her garden. I thought about the women in my divorce support group, who had celebrated with me when I signed the lease on my apartment and sent encouraging texts when I was having difficult days. Yes, I said, surprised by the certainty in my voice. I do. What would it look like to invest more energy in those relationships and less energy in trying to fix the ones that are hurting you? It was a radical thought. For 55 years, I had operated under the assumption that family was forever, that blood was thicker than water, that you fought for the people who shared your DNA no matter how they treated you. But what if that was wrong? What if family was not about biology but about choice? What if the people who truly loved you were the ones who showed up consistently, who celebrated your victories and supported you through your struggles, who did not put your photo on memorial cakes when you made decisions they did not like? I think, I said slowly, it would look like freedom. After I hung up with Sarah, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea and my laptop, scrolling through the photos from the reunion one more time. But this time, instead of focusing on my absence, I looked at what was actually there. I saw Tom's forced smile, the way his jaw was clenched even as he posed for pictures. I saw Carol's tight expression, the stress lines around her eyes that suggested the weekend had not been as perfect as the social media posts indicated. I saw Emma's boyfriend Derek looking uncomfortable, checking his phone while conversations happened around him. And I saw Richard. He was in several of the photos, always positioned close to Emma, his hand on her shoulder in a way that looked possessive rather than affectionate. In one picture, he was sitting in the chair that had always been mine during family gatherings, the one with the best view of the lake. He looked older than I remembered, grayer, but also strangely diminished, like a man trying to fill a space that was too big for him. Looking at him now, removed from the daily reality of living with his criticism and control, I felt something I had not expected: pity. He had gained access to my family by losing me, but what kind of victory was that? He was 57 years old, divorced, clinging to relationships that were not really his, sitting in a chair that would always remind everyone of the woman who used to occupy it. I closed the laptop and went to bed, but sleep was elusive. I kept thinking about the cake, about the symbolism of being declared dead while very much alive. In literature, which I had studied and taught for decades, that kind of metaphor usually meant rebirth was coming. The old self had to die for the new self to emerge. Maybe my family had done me a favor. Maybe they had officially released me from the obligation to keep trying to earn their love. Maybe being dead to them meant I could finally start living for myself. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I had not felt in months. I made coffee, watered my plants, and then I did something I had never done before. I started planning a life that had nothing to do with the people who had hurt me. I opened my laptop and began researching solo travel options for women over 50. I looked into volunteer opportunities at the local animal shelter. I found information about pottery classes at the community center, something I had always wanted to try, but had never made time for during my years of managing Richard's needs and expectations. By noon, I had signed up for a painting class, booked a weekend trip to the Oregon coast, and sent an email to my former colleague Janet, asking if she wanted to have lunch and catch up. For the first time in months, I felt excited about my future. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Emma. "Mom, I have been thinking about our conversation yesterday. Have you? I want to apologize, not just for the cake, but for everything, for not standing up for you, for letting them exclude you, for making you feel like you do not matter." I sat down, unprepared for the tears that suddenly filled my eyes. Thank you for saying that. I have been talking to Derek about it. He said that if someone put my photo on a memorial cake, he would lose his mind. He said family is supposed to protect each other, not punish each other for making hard choices. Derek, who I had dismissed as just another boyfriend, had shown more loyalty to me in one conversation than my blood relatives had shown in 8 months. Derek sounds like a good man. He is, and he wants to meet you properly. Not at some family thing where everyone is walking on eggshells, but just us. Maybe dinner this weekend? I would like that. Good. And Mom, I am sorry it took me this long to call. I was scared. Scared of what? Scared that if I chose your side, I would lose everyone else. But Derek made me realize that any family that makes you choose sides is not really a family worth keeping. We talked for another hour, making plans for dinner, and discussing the possibility of Emma visiting my apartment, something she had never done since I moved out. When we hung up, I felt something shifting inside me, a loosening of the knot of grief and anger I had been carrying since seeing those photos. One person choosing to see me, to value me, to remember that I was alive. It was not everything, but it was enough to start rebuilding on. That evening, I took a long walk through my neighborhood, really seeing it for the first time since I had moved in. The Victorian houses with their carefully tended gardens. The coffee shop on the corner where the baristas knew my order. The bookstore with the hand-painted sign and the cat sleeping in the window. This was my life now. Small, quiet, mine. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that felt like more than enough. 3 days after my conversation with Emma, I was standing in the produce section of Whole Foods when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Maggie? Maggie Thompson? I turned around to see Carol, my sister-in-law, pushing a cart full of organic vegetables and looking like she had seen a ghost, which I supposed she had. Hello, Carol. She looked around nervously, as if checking to see who might witness this encounter with a dead woman. I did not expect to see you here. Because dead people do not shop for groceries? Her face flushed red. Maggie, about the cake. That was not supposed to be public. Ashley was not supposed to post those pictures. But you were supposed to put my photo with the deceased relatives? It was symbolic. I thought it might help everyone process the changes in the family. I set down the bunch of kale I had been examining and gave Carol my full attention. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, who had always seemed to make up for her physical size with an oversized personality and strong opinions about how everyone else should live their lives. Carol, I want you to explain to me what exactly I am supposed to be dead from. You know what I mean? No, I really do not. Please enlighten me. She shifted uncomfortably, her hands gripping the handle of her shopping cart like it was an anchor. You left Richard. You left the family. You made your choice. I left my husband. I did not resign from being your sister-in-law. It is the same thing. Is it? Because last I checked, I was still Tom's sister. I am still Emma's mother. I am still the same person who helped you plan your daughter's baby shower and drove you to the hospital when you had your gallbladder surgery. That was different. How? Carol looked around again, clearly hoping this conversation would end, or that someone would rescue her from having to explain herself. You were married then. You were part of the family unit. The family unit. Yes. And when you broke that unit, you changed everything. I stared at her, trying to process the logic that suggested my value as a human being was entirely dependent on my marital status. Carol, do you hear yourself? You are saying that my worth to this family was entirely tied to being married to Richard. That is not what I am saying. Then what are you saying? I am saying that choices have consequences. And when you chose to divorce Richard, you chose to step outside the family structure. The family structure that you get to define? The family structure that has worked for everyone for 30 years. Worked for everyone except me. Carol's expression hardened. Maggie, marriage is not supposed to be easy. You do not just quit when things get difficult. I did not quit. I survived. By destroying a good man. By leaving a man who made me feel worthless. Richard loves you. He made mistakes, but he loves you. I felt that familiar surge of anger that came whenever someone tried to redefine my experience for me. Carol, Richard spent 32 years telling me I was too sensitive, too needy, too demanding. He made me feel like I was crazy for wanting basic respect and partnership. That is not love. That is control. You are being dramatic. Am I? Because the last time I checked, people who love you do not systematically tear down your self-esteem for 3 decades. Carol shook her head, clearly frustrated that I was not accepting her version of reality. Richard is devastated, Maggie. He cries every time someone mentions your name. Then he should have thought about that before he spent our entire marriage treating me like his personal assistant instead of his wife. He provided for you. He gave you a beautiful home, financial security, a place in the community. He gave me a cage. And now you are living in some tiny apartment, working at a library, acting like you are better off alone. I am better off alone. Carol stared at me like I had just announced that I believed the earth was flat. No woman is better off alone, Maggie. This woman is. We stood there in silence for a moment, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of grocery shopping, cartwheels rolling across linoleum, the beep of checkout scanners, children asking their parents for candy. The family misses you, Carol said finally, her voice softer. Do they? Because declaring someone dead is not usually how people express that they miss them. I told you that was symbolic. It was cruel. It was honest. The word hung between us like a challenge. Honest. As if putting my photo on a memorial cake was some kind of truth-telling exercise rather than a calculated act of emotional violence. You want honest, Carol? Here is honest. For 32 years, I made myself smaller and quieter and more grateful so that everyone else could be comfortable. I never complained when Richard made major decisions without consulting me. I never objected when he criticized my friends, my clothes, my opinions. I kept the peace by keeping my mouth shut. That is what wives do. That is what doormats do. Carol flinched as if I had slapped her. And now that I have stopped being a doormat, you do not know what to do with me. So you decided to symbolically kill me, rather than deal with the fact that I might have a point of view worth considering. You are being unfair. Am I? Because it seems to me that the only unfair thing here is expecting me to pretend that 32 years of emotional neglect was actually a good marriage. Richard is a good man. Richard is a controlling man who has convinced all of you that his version of reality is the only one that matters. He never said a bad word about you, even after you left. Of course he did not, because saying bad things about me would make him look like the kind of man who drives his wife away. Much better to play the role of the heartbroken husband, whose ungrateful wife abandoned him for no reason. Carol's face was getting redder, and I could see that I was pushing her past her comfort zone. Good. I was tired of making other people comfortable at my own expense. You know what, Maggie? Maybe it is better that you were not at the reunion. Maybe we do not need your negativity and selfishness disrupting our family time. There it is. The real reason I was excluded. Not because it would be awkward with Richard there, but because you do not like the person I am becoming. The person you are becoming is angry and bitter. The person I am becoming is honest. And apparently that threatens you. It does not threaten me. It disappoints me. Good. I would hate for you to waste energy being threatened by someone you have already declared dead. I picked up my shopping basket and started to walk away, but Carol called after me. Maggie, wait. I turned back. What do you want from us? It was a good question. What did I want from them? An apology? An acknowledgement that they had treated me badly? An invitation to rejoin a family that had shown me exactly how much they valued my presence? I want you to remember that I am a human being with feelings and opinions that matter. I want you to stop treating my divorce like a personal attack on your values. And I want you to understand that putting someone's photo on a memorial cake is not symbolic. It is vicious. And if we cannot do that, then you can keep your family reunion. I will build a life with people who actually want me in it. That afternoon, I met Janet for lunch at a small cafe in Southeast Portland. Janet had been my closest colleague at the library, a woman in her early 60s who had retired 2 years before me and spent her newfound freedom traveling, taking art classes, and generally living the life she had always wanted. You look different, she said, as we settled into a corner booth with our sandwiches. Different how? Lighter, like you have been carrying something heavy and finally put it down. I told her about the reunion, about the cake, about my encounters with Emma and Carol. Janet listened without interrupting, occasionally shaking her head or making sympathetic noises. Jesus, Maggie, they put your picture with the dead people? In full color, very thoughtfully positioned between my deceased cousin and my great-aunt. That is not dysfunction. That is psychological warfare. I keep wondering if I am overreacting, if maybe Carol is right and it was just symbolic, not meant to be hurtful. Janet set down her sandwich and looked at me directly. Maggie, in what universe is symbolically declaring someone dead not meant to be hurtful? The universe where I am supposed to be grateful for any attention at all, I suppose. Screw that universe. You deserve better. It was such a simple statement, but it hit me with unexpected force. You deserve better. How long had it been since someone had said that to me without qualifying it, or explaining why I should be content with less? I think I am starting to believe that, I said. Good, because you do. And anyone who tells you otherwise is more invested in keeping you small than in seeing you happy. We spent the rest of lunch talking about Janet's recent trip to Italy, about the pottery class I had signed up for, about the small joys of living alone after decades of considering someone else's needs before your own. You should come with me to book club next week, Janet said as we prepared to leave. We are reading this great novel about a woman who inherits a house in France and has to decide whether to stay in her safe, boring life or move to another country and start over. That sounds terrifying. That sounds liberating. That evening, I was watering my plants when my phone rang. It was Tom. Maggie, Carol told me she ran into you today. Did she? And what did she tell you about our conversation? She said you were angry. I was honest. Carol apparently cannot tell the difference. Tom sighed. Look, I think we need to talk. Face to face. Can you come over for dinner tomorrow night? Will Richard be there? No, just me and Carol and the kids. I considered the invitation. Part of me wanted to say no, to maintain the distance that was finally allowing me to think clearly about my family dynamics. But another part of me was curious about whether Tom was capable of having a real conversation about what had happened. Okay, but I am driving myself, and I am leaving if the conversation becomes about what I need to do to fix this. Fair enough. And Tom, I want you to understand something before I come over. I am not the same person I was when I was married to Richard. I am not going to apologize for leaving him, and I am not going to pretend that being excluded from the family reunion was somehow my fault. I hear you. Do you? Because your wife seems to think that divorcing an emotionally abusive husband makes me selfish and ungrateful. Maggie, Richard was not abusive. How would you know? Because I know Richard. He is a good man. Tom, do you remember my 40th birthday party? Of course. Do you remember what happened when I suggested we have it at that new restaurant downtown instead of at home? Tom was quiet for a moment. I remember Richard saying it was too expensive. Do you remember how he said it? Maggie, that was 15 years ago. He said it in front of 20 people, including you. He said I was being unrealistic and frivolous, and that someone needed to keep me grounded. He made me apologize to our guests for being impractical. That was just Richard being Richard. That was Richard humiliating me in public for having an opinion he did not like, and you all sat there and watched it happen. You did not think it was your business. Just like you did not think it was your business when he started making all our financial decisions without consulting me. Just like you did not think it was your business when he stopped me from taking that job at the university library because he decided I needed to be more available for family obligations. Maggie, marriage is about compromise. Compromise is when both people give something up to reach a solution they can both live with. What Richard and I had was not compromise. It was me giving up everything I wanted so he could have everything he wanted. I had no idea you felt that way, because you never asked. None of you ever asked how I was doing, whether I was happy, whether I felt heard and valued in my own marriage. You just assumed that as long as Richard was satisfied, I must be fine too. Tom was quiet for a long time, and I could hear the sounds of his household in the background, Carol calling to one of their children, the television playing in the living room, the normal sounds of a family evening. Tomorrow, he said finally. We will talk about all of this tomorrow. The next evening, I drove to Tom's house in the suburbs, a neighborhood of large colonial-style homes with manicured lawns and 3-car garages. It was the kind of place Richard had always wanted us to move to, the kind of place where success was measured by square footage and the brand of car in your driveway. Tom answered the door and hugged me, the same careful hug I remembered from childhood when he was trying to comfort me but was not quite sure how. You look good, Maggie. Thank you. Carol appeared behind him, looking less comfortable than she had in the grocery store. Without the buffer of public space and social expectations, she seemed smaller, more uncertain. Hi, Maggie. Hello, Carol. We settled in their living room, and I accepted a glass of wine that I probably should not drink if I wanted to stay clear-headed for whatever conversation was coming. "I want to start by apologizing," Tom said. "For the reunion, for the cake, for not talking to you before we made decisions that affected you. Thank you. But I also want to understand what you need from us going forward. Because honestly, Maggie, this feels impossible to navigate." "Impossible how?" "Richard is part of our lives. He is my business partner. He coaches Jake's son's baseball team. He has been part of our family for 30 years. We cannot just pretend he does not exist. I am not asking you to pretend he does not exist. I am asking you not to erase me because he exists. But how do we do both? How do we maintain our relationship with Richard and still include you in family events?" It was a fair question, and I appreciated that Tom was at least acknowledging the complexity of the situation, instead of pretending there was an easy solution. "You invite us both and let us be adults about it. You stop treating my presence like a threat to his comfort. You remember that I was your sister before I was his wife, and I will be your sister long after the divorce is final." Carol leaned forward. "But Maggie, it is awkward. He still loves you. That is not my problem anymore." "It is not your problem, but it affects all of us. Every time your name comes up, he gets emotional. It is uncomfortable for everyone. So your solution is to make sure my name never comes up by excluding me from family events? Our solution was to give everyone time to adjust, by symbolically killing me." Carol flinched. "I explained that. It was meant to represent the end of that chapter of your life. Carol, chapters end when you turn the page. They do not end when someone declares the author dead." Tom intervened before Carol could respond. "Okay, the cake was wrong. We can all agree on that. But what do we do now? Now you decide whether you want a relationship with me based on who I am, not who I was when I was married to Richard. What does that mean? It means you stop waiting for me to come to my senses and go back to him. It means you stop treating my happiness like a betrayal of your friendship with him. It means you remember that I am a person with my own thoughts and feelings and needs, not just Richard's estranged wife. We do remember that." "Do you? Because when Emma told you she wanted to bring me to the reunion, what was your first concern?" Tom looked uncomfortable. "We were worried about how Richard would feel. And what was your second concern?" "How awkward it would be for everyone." "And your third concern?" "I do not understand. At what point in that conversation did anyone ask how I would feel about being excluded from a family tradition I have participated in for 38 years? The silence that followed was answer enough. "That is the problem," I continued. "My feelings, my needs, my perspective stopped mattering the moment I filed for divorce. Everything became about managing Richard's emotions and protecting everyone else from discomfort. We were trying to do what was best for everyone." "You were trying to do what was easiest for everyone. There is a difference." Carol set down her wine glass. "Maggie, what do you want us to do? Choose between you and Richard? I want you to stop acting like including me requires excluding him, or vice versa. I want you to treat me like a member of this family, instead of like a problem that needs to be managed. And if Richard cannot handle being around you, then Richard can choose not to attend events where I will be present. But that should be his choice to make, not a decision you make for him by excluding me preemptively." Tom nodded slowly. "That is fair." "Is it? Because I feel like I am asking for basic human dignity, and you are responding like I am requesting a kidney. It is not that simple, Maggie." "Why not?" "Because Richard is not just family. He is my business partner. If this affects our working relationship, then you have a business partner who is willing to let his personal feelings interfere with his professional obligations. That is a Richard problem, not a Maggie problem." Carol looked frustrated. "You are making this sound like Richard is the villain in this story." "I am making this sound like Richard is a grown man who needs to take responsibility for his own emotional reactions, instead of expecting everyone else to manage them for him. He is hurting, Maggie. I am sorry he is hurting. But his pain does not give him the right to control my access to my own family." "So what do we do at Christmas?" Tom asked. "Easter? Emma's wedding when that happens? You invite both of us like the adults we are, and you let us figure out how to coexist in the same space. You stop treating his discomfort as more important than my inclusion. And if he decides not to come, then he decides not to come. But that is his choice, not yours." We talked for another hour, covering ground we had probably needed to cover for months. By the time I left, nothing was completely resolved, But something had shifted. Tom and Carol had at least acknowledged that their approach had been hurtful, even if they were not entirely ready to change it. As I drove home through the quiet suburbs, I thought about the conversation and what it had revealed about my family's priorities. They were not malicious people, but they were conflict-averse people who had chosen the path of least resistance, without considering who got trampled in the process. 2 weeks later, I received a text from Tom. "Jake is having a barbecue this Saturday for his birthday. You are invited. Richard will probably be there too, but that is not a reason for you not to come." It was not exactly the enthusiastic inclusion I had hoped for, but it was progress. I texted back, "Thank you. I will be there." The barbecue was as awkward as I had expected it would be. Richard arrived 20 minutes after me, saw my car in the driveway, and almost turned around before Jake intercepted him and convinced him to stay. We maintained a careful distance from each other, like two former friends who had run out of things to say. But something interesting happened as the afternoon progressed. Without Richard's voice in my head telling me how to behave, I found myself relaxing, laughing with my nephews, engaging in conversations about books and travel and politics that I had not been able to have in years. My sister-in-law, Sandra, Jake's wife, pulled me aside while we were cleaning up. "I owe you an apology," she said, "for the reunion, for not speaking up when I should have." "Thank you for saying that. I want you to know that not everyone agreed with the decision to exclude you, but we thought it was better to go along with it than to create more family drama. And now I think sometimes drama is necessary. Sometimes people need to be uncomfortable before they will change." "Is that what happened?" Sandra nodded. "Watching you today, seeing how different you are, how much more yourself you seem, it made me realize what we lost when we chose Richard's comfort over your inclusion." "What did you lose?" "You, the real you, the person you are when you are not walking on eggshells." That evening, Emma called me. "Mom, Derek and I have been talking and we want to invite you to move closer to us." "Move closer how?" "There is an apartment in our building that just became available. Nothing fancy, but it has a great view of the river and it would put you 5 minutes away from us instead of an hour." "Emma, that is very sweet, but I like where I am." "I know. But I was thinking about what you said about building a life with people who want you in it. And I want you in my life, Mom. Really in it. Not just for holidays and special occasions. What about the family? What about maintaining those relationships? I will always love Uncle Tom and Uncle Jake. But Derek helped me understand that just because people are family does not mean they get to treat you badly. And you deserve better than being someone's afterthought." "When did you get so wise?" "When I realized that my mother is one of the strongest, most thoughtful people I know, and I was lucky to have her as an example of how to stand up for yourself." 3 months later, I moved into the apartment in Emma's building. It was smaller than my previous place, but brighter, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Willamette River and filled the space with natural light throughout the day. Emma and Derek helped me move, along with Janet and several other friends I had made since the divorce. As we carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs, I realized that this was what family felt like. People who showed up willingly, who celebrated your choices instead of questioning them, who made space for you without making you feel like you were taking up too much room. Tom and Carol came to my housewarming party, bearing a bottle of wine and what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm for my new life. Tom spent an hour talking to Derek about photography, and Carol admired the gallery wall I had created with photos from my recent trip to the Oregon coast. "You seem happy," Carol said as she prepared to leave. I am glad, and I am sorry it took me so long to understand what you were trying to tell us." "What was I trying to tell you?" "That you deserve to be seen, really seen, for who you are, not just for the role you played in someone else's life." 6 months after the family reunion that had declared me symbolically dead, I was very much alive. I had learned to paint watercolors, traveled solo to Vancouver, and started volunteering at a literacy program for adult learners. I had built a life that felt authentically mine, surrounded by people who valued my presence rather than tolerating it. Richard had eventually stopped coming to family events, a decision that was presented to me as if I should feel guilty about it. I did not. If his love for me had been real, he would have wanted me to be happy, even if that happiness did not include him. The fact that he could not bear to see me thriving without him told me everything I needed to know about the nature of our relationship. 1 year later, Emma got engaged to Derek in a quiet ceremony by the river, The wedding planning became an opportunity for our family to practice their new skills at inclusion and conflict resolution. When Emma asked me to help her choose between two venues, no one suggested that Richard's opinion should be considered. When she wanted my input on the guest list, no one questioned whether my preferences mattered. The night before the wedding, Emma and I sat on my balcony watching the sunset reflect off the water. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever regret it? The divorce, the family drama, all of it?" I considered the question, thinking about the woman I had been 2 years ago and the woman I was now. I regret that it took me so long to value myself enough to leave. I regret that I wasted 32 years trying to earn love from someone who was not capable of giving it. But I do not regret choosing myself. Even though it cost you relationships with some of the family, Emma, relationships that require you to diminish yourself in order to maintain them are not relationships worth having. What about the people who have come around? Uncle Tom, Aunt Carol, the others who are trying to do better? I am grateful for their willingness to grow, but I do not need their approval to justify my choices anymore. That sounds lonely. It sounds free. The next morning, Emma walked down the aisle in a dress we had chosen together, toward a man who loved her exactly as she was. I sat in the front row, no longer the wife of someone important, but the mother of someone precious, watching my daughter begin a marriage based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. During the reception, Tom raised his glass for a toast. "To Emma and Derek," he said, "and to the importance of choosing love over convenience, authenticity over comfort, and courage over convention." He looked directly at me as he spoke, and I understood that the words were meant for me as much as for the newlyweds. Later that evening, as I helped clean up, I found myself in the kitchen with several other family members, washing dishes and wrapping leftover cake. It was a simple moment, but it felt significant. I was included not because someone had decided I was useful, but because I belonged. Carol appeared beside me with a dish rag. "Maggie, I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" "Next year's family reunion. We are going back to the lake house." "Okay. I want you to know that you are invited. Not as Richard's ex-wife, not as Emma's mother, but as yourself, as Tom's sister, as part of this family. Thank you. And Maggie, there will not be any memorial cakes. The only people we will be remembering are the ones who are actually gone." I laughed, surprising myself with how good it felt to find humor in something that had once caused so much pain. "Good to know I will be attending as a living person." "You were always a living person, Maggie. We just forgot how to see you that way." That night, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea and thought about the journey from that terrible Tuesday morning when I had discovered my face on a memorial cake to this moment of quiet satisfaction. It had not been easy, and it had not been quick, but it had been worth it. I had learned that family is not about blood or history or tradition. Family is about choice, about showing up consistently, about making space for each other to grow and change and become the people you are meant to be. I had learned that love without respect is not really love at all, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you deserve. Most importantly, I had learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely, and that the opinion of people who do not value you is not worth having. 2 years ago, my family had declared me symbolically dead for choosing to live authentically. Tonight, surrounded by the quiet satisfaction of a life I had built on my own terms, I had never felt more alive. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly how little they value you. It forces you to stop waiting for their approval and start building a life you actually want to live. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, some of those people will realize what they almost lost and do the work to deserve a place in your new life. But even if they do not, you will still have chosen yourself. And that choice, more than any family reunion or memorial cake or symbolic gesture, is what sets you free.